Gang. I've talked a lot about retro games in various vlogs and in the Retro Renegade podcast and my own podcasts, but I want to get more specific into it. And while, I'm in my 40s, one of those latter day Gen X kids, and I grew up with, arcades and Atari and the NES, I wanted to start here with Super Nintendo because it had the most profound impact on me as a gamer and as a kid. And so here are, it's not the best games on Super Nintendo, it's not a list of the best RPGs or the best of anything. These are the 7 games that I think had the most impact on me as a gamer. The most influential ones for me that has, trickled down to where I am now and the games that I play now. And some of them, yes, they were, better on PC, but when I was a kid, the PC was something that was not within my reach until I was much older. So it was, the Super Nintendo was what I had for various reasons. So let's just get into it. Here are my 7 most influential Super Nintendo games that changed my life. And the best place to start is probably the one that's going to get me a few fights, but it's Final Fantasy IV, or 2. What, as we knew when we were kids, I adored Final Fantasy originally when it was on the NES, and I played a lot of, the RPGs of that era, and there are a lot of good RPGs on Super Nintendo, don't get me wrong. The SNES has everything. And yes, Final Fantasy VI is among my very favorites. But to be fair, it was Final Fantasy IV that really set the tone for what would become my passion for Final Fantasy games all of these years later. And there was just something about this game, it made you work. Yeah, there was that thing where you'd get the Slumber Sword and duplicate the hell out of it to make a bunch of money. We all did it, and we all know it. We were all disappointed when that got removed in the pixel remasters and later iterations, but it's not the point. There was something compelling about this game. Whether it was the characters, the story, yeah, it's, save the world, the guy, the supposed anti-hero becomes the good guy and goes on a full redemption arc, and there's betrayal and intrigue and all of those things that make for good storytelling, but delivered on console in a way that we hadn't seen before. And I truly fell in love with it. Yes, of course, going, looking for the spoon and the various summons and the whole thing with Rydia and Kane being an ass hat. I mean, what's not to like? And Rosa, well, Rosa is honestly kind of bland to me. Rydia was always best girl, especially when she grew up. That would have been an interesting combination. I shipped Cecil and Rydia, I'll be honest. But, this formed my passion for RPGs. And the next game I'm going to mention cemented it in an even more profound way. And that, of course, is Chrono Trigger. Multiple endings, characters, time travel, combat, the music. I mean, Square Enix games now will keep it current. Music has always been one of the most delightful parts of these games. Chrono Trigger is definitely no exception, and even Chrono Cross, which, is hotly debated, the music is still phenomenal. But Chrono Trigger took my passion for RPGs and just elevated it to the next rung, because we had multiple endings, multiple things, and there were, some changes you could make that depended on the decisions you made. And, it formed the basis for what would become my lifelong passion for RPGs. Especially, RPGs from Asia. I've never been that keen on Western RPGs. Anybody who knows me knows this. There's very few that have called to me. But when it comes to JRPGs, I'm all there. And there is a list of them a mile long on the Super Nintendo. And I adore them. But Final Fantasy IV and Chrono Trigger are really what set the stage. That would push me into later games. And Final Fantasy VI is my probably my favorite. It bounces back and forth depending on the day. It's either between 4 and 6. 4 built a house that I wanted to live in. 6 made it nice, and Chrono Trigger basically made it my forever home when it comes to RPGs. And that's one of my main genres of games even now, with Legend of Heroes and other games that I do play that are new, or I go back and I play retro games. It's going to be, Final Fantasy IV. I'm going to replay Chrono Trigger here on the channel at some point. And, maybe Lufia 2. And some of these other fantastic Super Nintendo titles that I just adored when I was young. But it wasn't just RPGs for me. I got my first taste of city building with SimCity, which, yes, I know. I played it on PC too, but there was something nice about SimCity on the Super Nintendo. The fact that I could play it at home, because that's what I had. And, I got to try SimCity with a friend's computer when I stayed overnights there, but it wasn't the same. SimCity was the game that I had. It was my city builder. Yes, I, crashed the airplane onto the airport to make it smaller to limit its pollution. And yes, I would pick a map and I'd let it run for, over 50 years to get that statue so I'd have that bump. I did all those little things that, those little tips and tricks to try to make the best city, and had things laid out and got all the amusement parks and all the things. And then, yes, of course I summoned Bowser to tear it all down, and I would cackle in sadistic glee as my city burned. Nothing but fond memories for SimCity, and it continued with later iterations like SimCity 4, I absolutely adore. And now City Skylines has taken that place in my heart, and I'm looking forward to Skylines 2. But sometimes, especially when I'm in a bad mood and I just need a break from everything, I'll jump back into that SimCity and I'll just put on the game and I'll listen to the music, those catchy tunes. They stick with you. They're in my head right now as I'm talking about it. Something about this game introduced me to strategy games, simulation games, resource management, and all those games that I play now all come from this and some of the other titles that remain on this list, which I'm sure some of you will recognize, or maybe you won't. Genghis Khan 2. I love Koei games. I have been a huge fan of them since this one and Inendo, Uncharted Waters, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Nobunaga's Ambition. But this one has more of a unique place in my memory, not so much because it was the greatest, although, I mean, there was some fun there, and smacking enemy units with elephants was great. This introduced us to strategic titles, and to an extent, tactical RPGs. There's some shared DNA there. It was a game that I played with my dad, which my relationship with my father has never been the best, but some things we could agree on were video games, and this was one of them. Or when I stomped his butt into the ground in Pacific Theater of Operations 2. That was particularly joyful as well. But this is the one that started me on that strategic path of, building a nation, making alliances, going to war. It had the things, and now we see these games have exploded, and there's more being made all the time. And, Paradox has built a fantastic business around their grand strategy games. And we can go back and we can look at titles like Genghis Khan 2 as the catalyst for that genre. And it changed my perspective on what kind of games I could enjoy that actually made me think and plan. And I liked that. It scratched an itch in my brain that when I was a kid I didn't know I had. But I was grateful to discover. Then we get to Ogre Battle, which, for all its weirdness and its faults and, the things, it was early tactical RPGs. These are the things that led the way to things like Tactics Ogre and Final Fantasy Tactics. You had to pick your cards to get your starting character. I generally preferred a samurai. And you'd do different things. You'd choose the light path or the dark path. You'd go around recruiting monsters or characters that you wanted. There was a depth of interesting content there in this game that just drew me in, and I wasted a stupid amount of hours in. And even now, I still adore the music for it. And the fact that Square and Enix eventually merged just made it better, because it brought together two companies that were making games that I absolutely adored. And, like, how can I really complain about that? The next one, which, if you notice a theme, I kind of jump between RPGs and simulation and strategic titles. There's a reason for that. That's mainly what, like, I played a lot of other games on Super Nintendo, and yes, I adored the Mario games, and I loved, Mario Kart and all the other various weird and wonderful games that the Super Nintendo had. But Civ, I didn't really get to try it, the original, on PC, of course. But I fell in love with the entire, like, it's the simulation, the strategy, and the building up of a nation, which now, Civ 5, Civ 6, even Civ Beyond Earth, or whatever it's called, I play every single one of them. And it's because of the Super Nintendo. That's where I, encountered these games and fell in love with them. And there was something about exploring the world and building up your nation, building up an army, and going to war with other nations, just like I did in Genghis Khan. This was another expression of that, but it required more thinking, and it got me working to decide, what am I going to build? How many units do I need? Who am I going to attack? It opened up a world that I didn't know outside of, the fantasy novels and comic books I was reading. It expanded my horizons in a way that school certainly didn't, but video games found a home with them. And finally, last but not least, is a game which, if you've been watching the channel, I've referenced many times, and it should come as no surprise, although maybe it will. And that's Uncharted Waters: New Horizons, which, again, a Koei title. There's a theme here, but it was the RPG of the sailing era that, the first one was interesting and I had fun with it, but second one, this one, the characters just leapt out at me. You had multiple characters. Occasionally you ran into them in the cusp of playing through a character's story. That was interesting, but they didn't really connect. And, you had, pirate combat and duels and trading and exploration and sailing around the world and getting a ship and building a fleet. And it just engaged every part of my brain because, as a kid, I thought about piracy and romanticized sailing on the high seas and, fighting for treasure and diplomacy at sword point. And that's, where I am now. All of these games changed my life in the way that of the games that I play now and the way that I interact with people and, the friends that I've made. I've found tremendous friends through the various games that I've played, sharing common interests with them, and just, it became a foundation and my escape from the real world. Which, at the same time, it taught me things. I learned things like, putting all the work of city management, it helped with math and planning, and it made me more organized. It's the same with the strategic games, the RPGs. You had to think about how you're going to beat a boss, or with New Horizons, I was planning out my fleet. How much of what item am I going to purchase here, so I'm going to sell over there, learning about different historical things that I may not have known before that I would later go on to research. Like, there's all kinds of things. And that's thanks to all of these games. And yeah, the NES had a big impact on me too, and I may do a list of that too. Or I may do them for several consoles, I don't know, but out of everything, it was the Super Nintendo that really changed everything. And these 7 titles specifically changed the way I looked at gaming, and to an extent the way I looked at the world. So what are yours? Put them in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, you know what to do. Do the things. Catch you guys later. Have fun out there.